Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up, and the first of 5 videos over the next couple of weeks chronicling the adventures of Harry, Ron, Hermione and Newt Scamander in J.K. Rowling's record-breaking magical world of Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts. We'll be reviewing every film in the Harry Potter series, from the humble beginnings of the Philosopher's Stone back in 2001 up to the finale 10 years later in the Deathly Hallows Part 2. In later videos we'll also be looking back at the first Fantastic Beasts and where to find them, plus reviewing the newest release, Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. Before we get ahead of ourselves, in this first review we'll be sharing our thoughts on the first 4 screen adventures in the Harry Potter series. We'll be starting with prepubescent flights of fancy before heading into puberty with the arrival of He Who Must Not Be Named, to see how the first 4 films in the series differ in style between the 3 respective directors and the shifting tone of Rowling's novels. Let's begin in 1990, when Rowling first got the idea on a mammoth train journey where, without the aid of pen and paper, she had to memorise all the ideas that were swimming around in her head about the magical world and the adventures of 11-year-old bespectacled Harry Potter, about to learn the truth, that he's a wizard and he's on his way to Hogwarts. After a number of publishers turned Rowling's first story down in the mid-90s, it was finally Bloomsbury who agreed to publish, and the rest is history. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, inexplicably referred to as Sorcerer's Stone to those readers across the pond, was published on June the 26th, 1997, and captivated readers young and old from the very beginning. When the rights to the series were finally purchased by Warner Brothers in 1999, the search was on for the cast, a screenwriter who could faithfully adapt Rowling's first novel, and a director who understood the spirit and inherent Britishness of Rowling's writing. With a proven track record making wonderful family films, from Home Alone to Mrs. Doubtfire, Chris Columbus was the frontrunner and set out his ideas to Warner Brothers and the producers, who were obviously nervous about ensuring this would be a success, given the growing popularity of the books. By the time filming commenced on Philosopher's Stone in September 2000, Rowling had already published the first 4 books in the series, with Goblet of Fire hitting shelves only a couple of months beforehand. Impressed with his work in the adaptation of David Copperfield and a fantastic screen test, 11-year-old Daniel Radcliffe was about to take on the journey of his life as the titular hero Harry Potter, alongside Rupert Grint's pitch-perfect Ron Weasley and Emma Watson's delightful Hermione Granger. Seeing the 3 kids on screen together is electric, each bouncing off one another at every turn of the plot. Philosopher's Stone is a simple story, therefore a perfect introduction to Rowling's multi-layered wizarding world, and in keeping the cast British, we have a who's who of British thesps, from Richard Harris as Professor Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School, to Dame Maggie Smith as head of Gryffindor House Minerva McGonagall, and Robbie Coltrane as Harry's entry point into the magical world, Rubeus Hagrid. The most perfect piece of casting, however, is clearly Alan Rickman as the snide Professor Snape. Rickman, in a role that so nearly went to actor Tim Roth, plays the duplicitous role with relish, and you can tell how much he's enjoying himself. From Harry's first peek into Diagon Alley, to the purchase of his wand from the late John Hurt's excellent Ollivander, to his arrival at Hogwarts, watching in awe from the boats crossing the lake at the many-turreted castle looming up out of the twilight, Potter fans could breathe a sigh of relief. Not only is this first adaptation of Rowling's work incredibly faithful to the first novel, it's also captured the wonder of the magical world in a stunning way for the screen. As soon as we set foot into Hogwarts and the students are sorted into their houses, we feel as if we've been here forever. Screenwriter Steve Kloves has taken Rowling's first novel and her sparkling dialogue and recreated it lovingly, and in places verbatim, whilst also adding more depth to certain characters and their interactions on screen. This first film is modest in its effects, with the big set piece being wizarding sport Quidditch being brought to life in all its fast-paced vibrancy and colour. It's a terrific standout sequence in a film that maintains great pace throughout. We need to discuss John Williams' outstanding score for this first film in the series. Williams has delved many times before into fantasy and adventure, from Indiana Jones to E.T., but his work on Harry's and Hedwig's themes couldn't be improved by any other composer. As soon as you hear those opening notes of the main theme, you know you're watching Harry Potter. Clichés are unavoidable here. It's magical. There are a number of brilliant scenes to choose from in Philosopher's Stone, but the one that represents a near-perfect adaptation from Rowling's words is the Mirror of Erised sequence. The emotion in Radcliffe's performance, alongside the late Richard Harris's fatherly Dumbledore, is a lump in the throat moment, and our standout scene in the first instalment in the series. Chris Columbus gets a lot of slack from critics for his child-friendly approach to the first two Potter films that he made. Rarely does he get the credit he deserves for what a magical start to the series this first film is. Yes, it's child-friendly because we're introduced to Rowling's magical world from the innocent perspective, that of 11-year-old children. Hogwarts is a towering giant of a construction housing everything that a child who's just been told he's a wizard could wish to find, making this the ultimate escapist fantasy, topped off by fantastic visuals, a stellar cast, and faithful storytelling. The hard work paid off when Philosopher's Stone was the highest-grossing film in the world on release in November 2001. The first instalment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy gave the film a run for its money, but Potter ultimately came top of the pile, and it's well-deserved. This first instalment is littered with series-high moments and is a perfect introduction into the joys of the magical world. There is a hint of danger and conflict, with more to come in the not-too-distant future in the sequels, but for the most part this is a joyous, hopeful first entry in the canon. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up, this is a near-perfect opening to the series. Welcome to the beginning of Harry Potter's magical adventures. It's going to be a bumpy ride. In a change to our regular grades for each film, we'll be doing it Harry Potter exam style. So, Philosopher's Stone gets top marks. Within a couple of days of the film's star-struck young leads attending the premiere of Philosopher's Stone, the crew from the first film, the majority of the first film's cast, with some welcome newcomers, and returning director Chris Columbus began production on the second story. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets has a darker plot than its predecessor, and it's actually the longest film in the series, despite it being a modest-length novel from Rowling. The very first thing to notice is the suddenly deeper voices of Radcliffe's Harry and Grint's Ron. After a house elf called Dobby, the series' first really challenging CGI that mainly works effectively, arrives at the Dursleys in Harry's bedroom, warning Harry not to return to Hogwarts for the new school year due to terrible things that are going to happen, Harry rebels against this advice as he knows Hogwarts is his true home. Having not heard from his best friend all summer, Ron and his brothers Fred and George fly a Ford Anglia to Surrey to rescue Harry from his monstrous relatives before making for the homely, quirky Burrow, the home of the Weasley family, where we get to see more of the amazing Dame Julie Walters as Mrs. Weasley than we did in the preceding film, and we get an introduction to Mark Williams' warm-hearted, humorous Mr. Weasley. From here, we swiftly head to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies and run into Malfoy and his father, introduced to us here, played with delicious venom by Jason Isaacs. Unable to get past the barrier at platform 9 3/4 to board the Hogwarts Express, Harry and Ron decide to fly the Ford Anglia to school, and the adventures of Year 2 well and truly begin. This second film in the series stays extremely close once again to Rowling's source novel, but adds levels of darkness to the narrative as students are being petrified by an unknown, unseen monster lurking within the castle, and we learn that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. The problem this second film in the series has, opposed to its predecessor, is that it's trying too hard to blend both the darkness of the plot with the humour of characters like Kenneth Branagh's pompous new Professor Lockhart, and it doesn't always work. The effects work this time around is a step up from Philosopher's Stone, but Rowling's second novel is sadly just not as engaging as her first. The sequences with the diary and Tom Riddle are intriguing, and the finale is a definite highlight of the film, but for the most part this is a plodding second entry in the canon that could have done with sticking perhaps a little less solidly to Rowling's novel in order to flesh out the characters a little more. The best way to describe the plot this time around is episodic. It feels like we go from one sequence to the next with no natural flow, which is a shame after the great pacing of Philosopher's Stone. Director Chris Columbus is clearly in control of the production and generates some great performances from the children, particularly the still impressionable Radcliffe, Grint and Watson, but the film is a good 20 minutes too long. That being said, Columbus unfairly faces a lot of criticism for his work on the first two films in the series, which is unwarranted. It was Columbus's vision of Rowling's work that gave the series two of its most successful films, after all. Columbus is not credited enough for bringing Rowling's first two stories to life on screen and allowing audiences to immerse themselves in every little detail of Rowling's nuanced world. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up. Originally envisioning himself at the helm of the series from beginning to end, Columbus decided to step down from directing duties for Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban to work as a producer instead. The search was therefore on for a new creative who would bring one of Rowling's most beloved stories in the series to the screen. In 2003, after producer David Heyman had seen director Alfonso Cuarón's racy teen picture Y tu mamá también, Heyman was convinced that Mexican-born Cuarón was the right man for the job of seeing in the advent of Harry Potter's teenage years. Cuarón had proven he could do teenage angst and lust, and whilst lust wouldn't yet play a part in Harry Potter, angst is certainly abundant in Rowling's third novel. From the outset, we have a more experimental score from returning maestro John Williams with a more ominous introductory theme over a now charcoal grey Warner Brothers logo and title font. 13-year-old Harry is practicing magic under his duvet late at night, unknown to the Dursleys, despite Uncle Vernon's suspicions. But it's not until Pam Ferris's deliciously nasty Aunt Marge arrives and taunts Harry about his parentage that Harry loses his cool and blows up his aunt. Accompanied by William's Aunt Marge's waltz, it's an entertaining addition to the now commonplace Dursley scene to start each film, and it's pitched perfectly. Harry, knowing he's broken wizarding law by performing magic in the presence of muggles, or non-magic folk, is now on the run, flagging down a striking purple bus that escorts him to the Leaky Cauldron pub, where he's informed that he hasn't been expelled from school. The Weasleys and Hermione arrive at the pub, and Mr. Weasley takes it upon himself to further fuel Harry's concerns about an escaped prisoner from wizarding prison Azkaban called Sirius Black, who it's feared has escaped to come after Harry. Reassuring Mr. Weasley that he's not going to go looking for Black and trouble, of course not, we return to the Hogwarts Express and head back to school. So far, this film has the best pace and flow of the three films in the series to date, as Harry, Ron and Hermione are discussing Sirius Black in a carriage on the train before the air turns to ice and hooded black figures glide onto the train and into their compartment, causing Harry to black out. These are Dementors, guards from Azkaban prison, who are looking for Sirius Black. They prey on your fears and unhappiness, and so have targeted Harry. The design of these creatures has never been better than in this film. From the scaly, long-fingered hands protruding from the cloak and the giant hole where the mouth should be that clings to their victim to suck out their soul, these creatures are perfectly realised from Rowling's description in the novel. From here on out, this is a more introspective film. What Cuarón balances well in this third film is the dark and the light, and this film is a beauty to look at, with top marks going to New Zealand-born cinematographer Michael Saracen, whose previous credits include Midnight Express and Angela's Ashes, for enabling the audience to feel the chill in the air every time the Dementors appeared, as well as juxtaposing this with the moments of childhood innocence like monkeying around in the common room. The passing of time over year 3 is also effectively handled, with the snowy ground and the whomping willow shedding its autumn leaves. Cuarón posits the landscape around these characters as a character all its own, which adds a further dimension to the story. Cuarón also brings out terrific performances from the three leads this time around. There are a couple of questionable scenes where Radcliffe hasn't yet matured to the correct level. Weeping for his parents and a shocking realisation about Sirius Black is a particularly jarring scene, but the remainder of Harry's angst and frustration is played very well. Grint and Watson also have more to do as Ron and Hermione this time around, and there are some vital new cast additions to the series. Following the late Richard Harris's passing before the second film's release in 2002, the character of the wise headmaster Albus Dumbledore is played with more humour and a hippie slant by series newcomer Michael Gambon. David Thewlis, originally considered for the role of Professor Quirrell in Philosopher's Stone, portrays Professor Lupin perfectly from Rowling's pages. Emma Thompson is inspired casting as Crystal Gazer Professor Trelawney, and Gary Oldman is wonderful as Sirius Black. In an apt decision from the filmmakers, Azkaban is the first time in the series where the focus is fully on Harry and his adventure, and not on extraneous subplots. As Rowling's novels increased in size, so did the threads of narrative. Therefore, the conscious decision was made to chastise anything that didn't directly affect Harry and his character arc, and consequently the film works for the better. Despite Azkaban being the longest of the first 3 books, this is one of the shortest films in the series. It's lean, it's fast-paced, and it's engaging. Whilst Azkaban has a few ups and downs, surely there's a more effective way of showing elation at the end of the film than with a cheesy freeze frame of Radcliffe's face centre screen. This is actually the most interesting Potter story to date, and if you're looking for a film that could stand apart from the rest of the series, this is it. A return to form for the biggest British film industry franchise. Azkaban has ultimately set us on a vastly different path to the largely sunny, escapist landscape of the preceding 2 films, and the darkness of the narrative is handled assuredly. Whilst some of the effects and creature work may be a little too much for very young audiences, fans of the series would not be alienated from the films. Far from it, in fact. This is an intelligent, beautifully crafted family film, and despite a couple of questionable character choices here and there, this is the most consistent of the 3 films to date. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up, Azkaban is... For the final film under the spotlight in part 1 of our Harry Potter retrospective, we turn to the mammoth Goblet of Fire. As if adapting the Potter stories for the screen hadn't been a challenge for the first 3 instalments, for returning screenwriter Steve Clovers, this would prove one of the hardest challenges in the whole series, turning a 600-plus page novel with so many massive set pieces and new characters into a lean 2.5-hour motion picture. Gone is the sweet and light of the first 2 stories in favour of hormones and horror, as this is the instalment that the franchise has been building to so far, the confrontation between Harry and he who must not be named. Before we get to that point, we take a whistle-stop tour from one of Harry's nightmares about Voldemort before heading straight to the Quidditch World Cup, before heading back to Hogwarts inside the first 15 minutes. There's so much to cram in this time around that there's no time for dawdling. The first frustration is that we get to see the campsite and the vast arena housing the Quidditch World Cup, but are denied seeing any of the game that Rowling goes into in great detail at the beginning of the novel. This is the first shame in a film that dispenses of some interesting side characters from Rowling's pages and a subplot about the rights of house elves that would have been great to see if only producers had decided to start splitting these films into multiple parts. Patrick Doyle provides an energetic and melodic score and thankfully doesn't try to imitate John Williams' scores for the previous 3 films. The sequence in the maze is moody and has distinct echoes of Bernard Herrmann's work on Hitchcock's masterpiece Vertigo. Having stepped down from the series after his fantastic work on Prisoner of Azkaban, Alfonso Cuarón's darker tone paved the way for Four Weddings director Mike Newell's even darker tale. Having said this, what Newell manages better than any of the directors thus far is to capture the humour and structure of British boarding school life. Harry, Ron and Hermione bounce off each other brilliantly this time around, and the pangs of teenage love and jealousy are lifted from Rowling's work well on screen. What is present in Goblet of Fire is largely executed very well, but some of the characterisation is definitely off this time around, most notably Michael Gambon's angry interpretation of Dumbledore. On revealing Harry's name as the 4th contestant in the Triwizard Tournament, this Dumbledore angrily accuses Harry of putting his name in the goblet for the attention and eternal glory that winning the tournament would garner. This is a misstep in this adaptation. Dumbledore would trust Harry implicitly and immediately come to conclusions about who else could have entered his name into the tournament. This characterisation aside, we've got new members of the cast this time, from Miranda Richardson's conniving reporter Rita Skeeter, determined to stir up trouble wherever she goes, to Brendan Gleeson, terrifying and entertaining in equal measure as new dark arts professor Alistair Moody, who's taking it upon himself to mentor Harry during the tournament. Despite this being a tough novel to adapt, once the tournament begins, we have a clear 3-act structure, each task showcasing more of the art department's stellar work than the next, until we get to the graveyard showdown that we've been building to since the series began between Harry and a reborn Voldemort. Ralph Fiennes is mesmerising as the epitome of evil, taunting our hero and giving him the chance to duel to his death. This is dark territory, particularly given that this is the first story in which we experience the death of a student. When said student's father realises what's happened to his son, it's devastating to watch and brilliantly played. The confrontation with Voldemort is our Crawford-Clark close-up standout scene. Yes, there are one or two frustrations with Goblet of Fire as a whole. Unlike Prisoner of Azkaban, whose story was half the length and so could afford the luxury of exploring characters and the natural world around them, Goblet of Fire is a mammoth film with epic set pieces that still manages to deftly build on these wonderful characters from Rowling's pages and show how much they've grown from the naivety of the first story only 4 years earlier. From Crawford-Clark Close-Up, Goblet of Fire. So that's part 1 of our Harry Potter series retrospective in the bag. What are your thoughts on the first 4 films in the series? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, so you don't miss part 2 of our retrospective and a ranking of the series coming soon. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter, and you can email us your suggestions for future reviews on the channel, crawfordclarkcloseup@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for watching, and that's a wrap.